Last week, we talked about putting sprinkles on holiday drinks. This week, we're going to talk all about KPIs and data driven decision making, which in many ways are the sprinkles that you put on top of your financials. Hello, and welcome to the Bar Business Podcast, where we help bar owners increase profits, attract loyal guests, and simplify operations so you can avoid burnout and finally enjoy your life outside of your bar. I'm your host, Chris Schneider, the Bar Business Coach. Before we get started, a quick thank you to our sponsors, Spot On, who provide a great modern POS solution for the bar and restaurant industry, and Starfish, who use AI to turn your books into actionable steps to increase profits. Today, we are diving into the essential key performance indicators that can make or break your bar's success. We're going to talk about how to track them effectively and show you and walk through how to use that data to make better business decisions. Now, many bar owners feel overwhelmed by the sheer number of metrics that you could potentially track. And without some guidance here, it's really easy to get lost. So we're going to talk about 3 types of KPIs and then 4 or 5 KPIs under each type that you may want to track. Now, not every KPI, if you've heard me talk about KPIs before, not every KPI is going to work for every business. But what I want to do today is give you these 3 categories, give you 5 ideas in each, and really talk through here's what you could track. And then I would challenge you, pick a couple, track them, get that data, and then use that data to drive your business forward. Because at the end of the day here, in business, we have a lot of data, and most of our data for most businesses, let's be honest, is not organized as well as it should be. Lord knows even my own, I may talk about KPIs and data incessantly, but I promise you I'm not tracking my own data as well as I should be. It's not always the most fun. It's not always the most interesting. But when you track your KPIs properly, you are unlocking the power of your data to make good business decisions. So we'll be focusing on the KPIs that truly matter and show you exactly how to use them to increase profitability and streamline operations. Now, as we go through these, as I mentioned, we're going to talk about 3 categories of KPIs. And those 3 categories are financial KPIs, operational KPIs, and guest experience KPIs. So what drives your financial success, what drives your operational success, and how can you measure what your guests feel about your business? Now, think about those 3 globally for a second. If your financial picture's in line, if your costs are under control and you're generating as much revenue as you can, you're going to make money. Your operational KPIs, your financial KPIs drive some revenue, but really, your operational KPIs are going to drive your revenue. That's looking at how efficient is your business. So how efficient are you with your money? And then operational KPIs, how efficient are you with your service, with your business? How well are you handling things? And then finally, like I said, we're going to talk about guest experience KPIs. So as I've said before, you can have a fantastic product on paper. You can have all your financial ducks in a row. But unless what you're providing has the right fit with your guests, it's very difficult to be successful. So let's get started talking through some financial KPIs. As I said a moment ago, our financial KPIs, that's really the efficiency of our financial management, and it's setting the stage to be able to make money. When it comes to an overall framework, I talk a lot about mindset, concept, culture. Financial KPIs are kind of your mindset when it comes to your KPIs. They're what's driving this business. If you don't have these in place, it doesn't matter what your other KPIs are because you're not making money. And unless you make money, you're not going to last in this business very long. So we're going to talk through 5 financial KPIs. Your pour cost percentage, your food cost percentage, your prime cost ratio, cash flow, and net profit. And it's important to understand how all these relate to each other. And of course, we will break that down as we go through. So starting off, pour costs, right? What is your beverage cost percentage? And we're going to talk food cost too. Be aware for this conversation. Food cost and beverage cost from an analysis standpoint, from a calculation standpoint, are the same. And how we calculate either pour cost or beverage cost or food cost is we take what we spent on a beverage or what we spent overall on alcohol beverages that we're serving, and then we divide that by the revenue that we got from beverages. Or from food, we take the cost of all the food that we've served and divide that by the revenue that we got for that food. Now, there are obviously a lot of different targets we can have in here, but to give you some general guidelines, in most cases, when we're talking food costs, you want to be somewhere in that 30 to 40% range. I mean, it's great if you can be down around 25. For bars, it's not as important on food costs to keep that low because most bars, when we think about them, you're selling 30% food, 40% food on a really, really high food sales bar. Some bars that I work with don't sell food at all, so it's 0%. So you can have a little bit of a higher cost there because really we're offering food as a way to get people to stick around and drink more. If you watch Bar Rescue, and we can have a whole conversation of what people think about John Taffer, that's neither here nor there. Personally, I think the guy comes off a little harsh sometimes, but most of what he says is really smart. And show after show after show, he quotes his statistic that 53 minutes is how much longer a guest stays in your bar when they order food. So if you offer food, you get that guest for 53 more minutes. 53 minutes means you can sell them 2 more drinks, and it doesn't really matter then what that food costs because we're selling the food to get those 2 more drinks. Obviously, if we have food costs in that 30 to 40% range, which is high by restaurant standards, but fine by bar standards, we're still making money on our food, and we're getting that guest to stay longer, and we're selling them drinks. So 30 to 40% in most cases is going to be all right. If you are more food heavy, if you're greater than 50% of your overall sales is food as opposed to beverage, you may want to think about having a food cost that's more around 27, 25%. Now, when we talk about beverage costs, what are good beverage cost targets? Generally speaking, when we talk about beverage costs, we're going to want to divide this up between liquor, beer, and wine at a minimum, because we're going to have different targets across all 3 of these categories. And so just how we would figure beverage costs, total cost for beverages divided by total revenue for beverages. If we're talking about beer costs, it would be total cost for beer divided by total revenue from beer. So we can break this down. We can even go so far as, bottled wine versus wine by the glass, or draft beer versus bottled beer. You can break this down almost infinitely far. But for most bars out there, just knowing liquor, beer, and wine is going to be enough of a breakdown. Now, what should those targets be? And here is the thing I will tell you. It's going to depend a lot on where you are. And the reason behind that is our other costs in our business are not the same location to location. So I have clients that I work with that are in rural areas, and their rent is $2,000 a month, $3,000 a month, $5,000 a month, $6,000 a month. Now, I don't see many $2,000 a month anymore. Like that's a pretty rural area and a pretty small spot. But the thing is, overall, there is the opportunity to have a higher cost percentage in a place like that because your overhead's lower, payroll's lower, everything is cheaper in rural Iowa compared to New York City. So understand that when I give you these percentages, where you are in this range is going to largely depend on where you're located and what your other costs look like. But for beverage costs, where we are looking to go on those, liquor, somewhere between 15 and 25%. Beer costs a little bit more. You're probably somewhere between 18 and 28%. And wine, it's going to depend a lot on the type of wine you sell. Because if you sell really expensive wine, you're going to have a worse margin than if you sell really cheap wine. And that's where we can have a whole conversation about contribution dollars versus contribution percentage. I would much rather sell a bottle of wine for $200 that cost me $150 than a bottle of wine for $40 that cost me $20. Because on the first bottle, I make more money for the same amount of work. It doesn't matter how much the bottle of wine is. It matters how much money am I making off that bottle of wine because it's the same amount of work either way. So I'm willing to accept a higher cost percentage. And those ranges I gave you are really big. For most people, let's say you're in middle America, the exact percentages I would say we should shoot for is about 22% on liquor, about 25% on beer, and about 27% on wine. But like I said, these ranges are going to vary a lot depending upon your other sales. Because the other thing here is too, and you got to think about this, a bottle of Bacardi costs basically the same amount of money regardless of where you are. It's not that much more expensive in New York City than it is in BFE, Oklahoma. But what you can charge for that drink is way more, right? You can charge, in a lot of cases, double in, say, like New York City or in LA than you can get away with in the middle of the Midwest or the middle of the South. So keep that in mind as you're looking at these percentages. The big thing is not necessarily what percentage you fix or you're shooting for, your target percentage for food and beverage costs. The big thing here is understanding that it fits in your economic model. A couple other KPIs we want to look at when it comes to financial KPIs. Your prime cost ratio. So the sum of labor and food and beverage costs put together as a percentage. So this is all your direct labor expense plus your food and beverage costs divided by your revenue. And for most bars, we're looking for that number to be somewhere between 55 and 60%. It depends on exactly how that number is being calculated and what you're including in it. But again, the thing here is it's not necessarily that 50% is good or 65% is bad. It's about your individual financial model. And if you really want to go a deep dive on prime cost numbers, there is a podcast episode I did a few months ago that covers all of that in detail. So you can refer to that episode on prime cost and why 55%, which is the number you normally hear quoted, is kind of made up. Next KPI we want to measure under our financial KPIs, well, two of them we'll talk about together here, cash flow and net profit. And the reason why we need to look at both of these numbers always is net profit. A lot of times when you just look at the bottom line after your accountant or your bookkeeper's done the books, you're looking after depreciation. You're not including, right? Because principal payments on loans are not expensed. Only the interest is expensed. So it is very plausible that your cash flow and your net profit don't even look the same. You can lose cash and have positive profit, or you can have positive cash and negative profit. Now, we know that a lot of bars, and I'm sure some of you listening to this podcast, you are sitting right on that line of kind of profitable. And if you're sitting on that line of kind of profitable, I'm thinking your bottom line is 5 to 8% of revenue. You can easily have a cash flow that's negative and a net profit that's positive, or vice versa. So you always need to track both of those numbers. If you're not tracking both of the numbers, you're in potentially a world of pain. Now, moving on. So that was our financial KPIs. Now we're going to talk about operational KPIs. And just like financial KPIs are kind of the mindset portion of looking at KPIs, operational KPIs are our concept. These are where we are drilling down on the fundamentals of what we're doing in order to make sure that we are being efficient in our business and that we are maximizing our ability to earn a profit. Operational KPIs, there are 5 that I like to look at. Labor cost is a percentage of sales. That goes in prime cost. It's kind of a financial one, but we can also break that down a little bit more, and we'll talk about that in a second. Average ticket times, because that is the efficiency of things getting to your guests. Sales per labor hour, because that's telling you how much, it's giving you an idea of what you can produce with one labor hour. And we'll talk about how to look at that. Inventory turnover rates. So how much inventory do you have on hand? And then the final one, and something that a lot of people don't do well, is tracking waste. So let's break these down. First, we're talking labor cost. So labor cost is kind of a financial metric in some ways, but in a second, when we start talking about sales per labor hour, you'll see how this becomes a little bit more operational. But why is our labor cost more operational than it is financial? Well, because our labor is how everything happens in a bar. We don't have some of us might, but most of us don't have robots. We don't have assembly lines. This is not a manufacturing business. Literally everything we do, every penny of revenue we produce is coming from the hard work of individuals that we employ. So we want our labor costs low from a financial perspective, but too often, far too often, I see people look at labor cost as a purely financial statistic. And they say, oh, we can cut a 1% off our labor cost. Great. But did that hurt your operation? Too often, when it comes to these kind of financial KPIs that are actually operational KPIs, we focus solely on the financial aspect, solely on cutting costs. And what that ends up meaning is that we haven't spent the time to look at the ramifications of cutting that cost. That we haven't realized that, yeah, we can lower our labor costs by 3%, but in lowering our labor costs by 3%, we've hurt our efficiency. We've made our bar run worse. So you never want to be in that position. And that's why labor cost, in my mind, is more of an operational KPI than a financial KPI, because we're not focused on getting that cost down as low as possible. We're focused on getting the best possible labor cost that does not negatively impact our operation. And that kind of takes us right to the next 2 points, or KPIs, to watch for in your operational KPIs. Average ticket times and sales per labor hour. So let's go sales per labor hour first. Labor cost, sales per labor hour, that's giving you an idea of how many people you need to sell something. And by measuring sales per labor hour, so what we're taking is we're just taking the number of hours that we're working and we're dividing sales by that number. You can break this down a lot of ways. You could say just front of house employees. You could say just your servers. How efficient are your servers? How much can they sell in an hour? And what you will find 9 times out of 10, as long as you're busy enough that you are reaching your maximum capacity, you can measure roughly what your maximum capacity is. How much sales can one labor hour produce front of house or behind the bar or in the kitchen? And once you know that, you can use your forecasting to predict your scheduling in a way that you never have too many folks on staff at a given time, but you also never have too few. Now, often when we look at sales per labor hour and we run all this math and we get into it deep, something you will find is that you need a little bit more labor than you think you do. And even with a little bit more labor than you think you need, you still have an hour or two that are crazy balls to the wall, weeded, and everybody's losing their mind. It's hard to avoid that. But sales per labor hour is going to tell you what is your capacity. And if you run sales per labor hour for each individual server and bartender, you can learn their individual capacity. Because let's be honest here, if your average server can handle $250 worth of sales in an hour, let's say, that means that some people on your team could do 350, 400 an hour, and some people in your team are only doing 150, 175, 200 an hour. And so when you know this, not only sales per labor hour as a whole to help with your forecasting and your scheduling, but sales per labor hour based on each individual that's working for you. That gives you the opportunity to train them, to work with them to get that number out, and to get them able to handle more sales. It also gives you the opportunity to know who should get scheduled on a busy night and who shouldn't. And not just, I like this person or I think this person works well. No, you mathematically have an answer of who is better able to handle higher volume nights. Now, when it comes to sales per labor hour for your kitchen and your bar, one of the big things about what they're able to handle is their ticket times. And if you guys have listened to this podcast for a long time, you know I love to talk about ticket times because ticket times are absolutely essential. How long it takes an item to get out and ready to go to a guest is important. And on most food items, we should be talking 8 to 12 minutes. On most cocktails, we should be talking 5-6 minutes on a ticket time max. There isn't a reason why in most bars, someone should have to wait 20 minutes to get a piece of food and never should have to wait 20 minutes for a cocktail. Now, if you're doing particularly fancy things, if you were a very fancy bar that did advanced mixology and you're smoking things and you're infusing things and you're doing all this right in front of the guest, okay, yeah, maybe it's going to take a little bit longer. But understanding ticket times, helps us understand how efficient we are and how well our operations running. So it's a very important thing to track. Now, the two other metrics we want to look at under operational or that I highly recommend that you measure if you aren't already are inventory turnover rates and waste tracking. And these go hand in hand as well. So waste tracking is going to say, how much are we wasting? And when I say waste, I mean spillage, right? Because we all know on a busy night and you got a bottle of Jack Daniels, you're pouring a ton of Jack and Cokes. You probably spilled some. Now that we probably don't have to worry about the little bit you spilled, but if you drop that bottle and it shatters, we need to account for that in our waste. Otherwise, it's going to throw off our financial metric of beverage cost. So understanding our waste is important. We need to write all this down. The same can be said if we're doing employee shift drinks or employee meals on the food end. We need to write this off in our books so that we understand that that's not an excess cost that was incurred. That is in a benefit we gave to our employees or a bottle that we dropped and broke. And that way we can actually accurately measure on the financial metric end our beverage cost against theoretical. And then finally, like I said, we have inventory. And inventory matters here because waste obviously is going to increase what you order. But within inventory, we would specifically want to talk about turnover rates. And there is math on turnover rates, and you can Google all that. I want to avoid getting too weeded right now because if you've listened, I have a tendency to do that. But inventory turnover rates, we're basically saying how often are things going in and out? And this is always a number of days. And so you might have enough vodka on hand, enough well vodka to last 21 days. Great. 21 days is a long time. And most bars, you're probably ordering vodka every week, twice a week. So you don't need 21 days worth of vodka. You need maybe 14, maybe 10. But that inventory turnover rate, we want to get that number down as low as possible. And the reason behind this is inventory is literal cash sitting on shelves. And when you have a bottle of vodka, you don't have cash. You have a bottle of vodka. Now you sell that bottle of vodka and you get cash for it, so you can convert that bottle of vodka into cash. But especially when we're trying to maximize our ability to use our finances, and if you're not doing so hot in a given month, having a bunch of money on the shelves doesn't help you. You'd rather have that cash in the bank. So by getting our inventory turnover as low as possible, by ensuring that we are moving inventory as quickly as we can, and we don't have 2 months worth of inventory, we have a week and a half or 2 weeks worth of inventory, we are ensuring that our cash is able to be spent and used on something that we need to spend it on and isn't just sitting on a shelf waiting for us to convert it from booze back into cash. So now let's talk through guest experience KPIs. And when we started this episode, I said, that we got 5 KPIs for each category. I'll tell you what, I lied. We only have 3 for this one. I wasn't looking far enough down my notes. But for guest experience KPIs, we want to really measure 3 things that are more important than anything else. Customer satisfaction, or our NPS score, guest check average, or average check size per guest, and then to the extent that we can, return customer frequency. So let's talk through these. The most important, if you're going to measure one KPI when it comes to your guest experience, it is your NPS. Your NPS score, Net Promoter Score, is essentially how much customers enjoy your business. And a lot of people, when you do guest surveys, you ask 15 questions. How was the food? How was the service? Were our bathrooms clean? Blah, 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 blah. And the problem is most people, sorry, they ain't going to fill that out. And the reason they're not going to fill it out is it takes too much time. You're asking too much of them. So when you survey your customers about their experience, you want to make it as short and concise as possible. The easy way to do that is to ask the Net Promoter Score question, which is one question. Based on your experience today, how likely are you to recommend our bar to your friends and family? And then you let them rate it between 1 and 10. 9 and 10 is a positive promoter. They are going to tell other people about your business, talk about how great their experience was, and bring in business for you. They are out there marketing, working hard to bring people in, or at least when somebody asks them, they're going to say good things about it. 7 and 8, they like your place. It's not their favorite. Will they come back? Probably. Are they going to tell their friends and family about it? Maybe. But generally, these folks are totally neutral if they give you a 7 or 8 on a 1 to 10 scale when you ask them, how likely are you to recommend our bar? So 9s and 10s are great. They promote you. 7 and 8s, they're there. They didn't have a bad time. They didn't have a great time. You did not impress them enough to get them to go say great things about you all over the place. So they're neutral. And then 6 or lower, they didn't have a good time. And because they didn't have a good time, they probably aren't ever going to say anything good about you. And if it's a 1 or a 2 or a 3, well, they're probably going to tell people they didn't enjoy their experience at your bar and that other people shouldn't go there and tell their friends to avoid you. But anything 6 or less is negative. And there are very complex NPS calculations that you can use. There are more simplistic ones. You can just average it all together and see where that score is. You can Google those. I'm not going to run through the weeds on NPS score calculations today. But the point is, this is the single most important metric to measure to understand your guests. Quite possibly it's the single most important metric to measure, period, because it doesn't matter how efficient your team is. It doesn't matter how well you manage your inventory. It doesn't matter how well you manage your finances. If people don't like your bar, they aren't going to come in, and then your revenue goes to 0 and everything else doesn't matter. It's freaking irrelevant. So the NPS score is probably the single most important metric to measure. And again, that question is just based on your experience today. Would you recommend our bar to your friends and family? 1 to 10. And if you want to follow that up with something, you can say why. You can also ask other questions on your survey. But I always, if I'm going to design a survey, put those 2 questions first, based on your experience, and then why. Because if somebody's going to answer just 1 or 2 questions, I want those answers. Those to me are the ones that tell me, are we being successful? Are we actually going to be able to grow this business? Do our customers, do the people that come in the door like what the heck we're doing? Now, the other guest experience KPIs that we want to look at are guest check average and return customer. Let's talk return customer frequency first, because this ties in the NPS score. Obviously, those 9s and 10s, you're going to assume they're going to come back. And one thing that was really hard to measure, even 10 years ago, was return customer frequency. Because especially if you're Midwest or South 10 years ago, there was a lot more cash than credit cards. Today, most bars, there are still people that are cash only. And I love that people can get away with that. But most bars are taking credit cards and most customers are paying with credit cards. That means we can use the data in our POS to check guest frequency. And so if we have a high NPS score and we see guests coming back over and over and over again, you can do this just by knowing people in your bar, walking around and talking to them and getting to know your customers as well. But when you see that return customer frequency is high, you know you're in a good spot. Something you have to keep in mind to be successful in this industry. Generally speaking, you want to see, you walk out into your bar, you want to see about 80% of those folks are return customers and about 20% of them are new customers. If you don't have 20% new customers in your bar at any given time, your customers will move, they'll die, they'll go somewhere else, and your business will slowly die. So you need to have that 80% that is solid regulars, but then you need 20% new folks all the time. So return customer frequency is important, but don't allow yourself to be tricked into thinking that how often customers come back and the fact that you have a large number of customers that come in once, twice, 3, 4 times a week means you don't need new customers. But the thing I do like about return customer frequency is it allows us to say, hey, I have 100 customers that come in 2 or more times a week, every week. And when you go to forecast and you go to analyze your financials, it's really good to know that because then you know, okay, I have a solid base. I always used to say I had a number of guys that came into my bar every day. And most of them were retired. They came in between 2 and 6 in the afternoon, and they were there like clockwork. They ordered the same thing every day, paid the same amount of money, tipped the same amount of money. They were just golden. And what I used to always joke about with those guys is they paid my utilities. They paid my light bill. They paid my gas. Because just as much as I could count on that electric bill or that gas bill every month, I could count on that revenue from them every month. So measuring return customers lets you understand the stability of your business. But again, understand the stability does not mean that you don't have to track new guests. So the third guest experience KPI I like to talk about is guest check average. Now, you could call this a financial KPI. You could call this operational. But to me, guest check average is an indication of the guest experience because we're talking about how long someone is there, right? Obviously, if I'm in a bar for an hour, I might have 2 drinks, maybe 3 if I'm really trying to hit it hard. If I'm in a bar for 4 or 5 hours, I'm going to have at least 4 or 5 drinks. Might have 7 or 8. I mean, even if I'm trying to be real responsible and I drove somewhere and living where I do in Southern Indiana, it's all hills and windy roads. Trust me, I am not getting anywhere near legally drunk and driving because the roads are a little sketchy for it. But in 4 hours, I can put down 6 or 7 drinks, wait a half hour if I pace them out properly, and I'm pretty sober to drive home. I mean, I still have some BAC, but I'm well under 0.08. And so that guest check average gives you an indication of how long people are there. It also gives you an indication of what people are spending, and it allows you to see how your team is impacting the guest experience. Now, let's talk about that real quick. So you can look at guest check average as a whole, which of course you should do. You can also look at guest check average for each individual bartender or for each server. And what you'll find a lot of times is the servers and the bartenders with the highest guest check average are the best at upselling. And upselling, when done wrong, can be really bad for the guest experience, right? Because it feels like I'm trying to push things on you. You want a steak. What you want me to put? Asparagus with that, and some béarnaise, and some crab, and we can do it that way. Or do you want me to coat it with pepper? Or do you want this? Or do you want that? Blah, 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 blah. I'm just trying to sell you, hard sell you. That's not cool. But more often than not, a high guest check average is a mark of a server or bartender that knows just how to say, oh, it's after dinner. Oh, you want coffee. Oh, I can do this really cool coffee cocktail that you're going to love. And it's not impacting the guest experience in a negative way because they're hard selling these upsells. Like it's some kind of diner where they're just throwing ideas at you, right? It's not hash browns at Waffle House. But what they're doing is they're guiding and curating the experience for your guests. And while guiding and curating experiences for guests may sound like a strictly fine dining thing, trust me, you can do that in a dive bar all day long as well, and use subtle upsells and recommendations to get that guest check average higher. So yes, guest check average doesn't always indicate a great customer experience, but higher guest check averages consistently with returning customers almost always means that bartender, that server is doing something different that's making the guest experience better. And those guests are either spending more money while they're there, buying things that are more expensive, or they're sitting there longer. So guest check average is a great indicator of guest experience. And for the record, if you have one bartender that has a way higher guest check average than the others, you need to figure out why and then train everybody else to do whatever it is that one bartender is doing. Because they're doing something that everyone else isn't. They're making more money, they're making you more money, and you want everybody to be able to make more money. Because then you also make more money. If everyone operates at that level, everyone earns more, you make more, everybody's happy. So to wrap this up for today, when you focus on these critical KPIs and you track them consistently, right? And like I said, you don't have to necessarily use all 13 KPIs we discussed today. Get down. Pick 1 or 2 financial KPIs, 1 or 2 operational KPIs, do an NPS score, look at guest check average, get your guest experience KPI. And when you track those consistently and you use that data, it helps you make better decisions. You have information now that you didn't have before that lets you actually choose the right path forward for your business. And so I will leave you with this thought, and I've said this plenty of times before, but I will always say it because it is always true. What gets measured, so what you have KPIs for, gets managed because your managers and you are going to try to make those KPIs better. What gets measured gets managed. What gets managed gets done. There's too many distractions. And unless you're actively looking at those KPIs, you will not get things improving in your statistics because it's not being managed and therefore it's not getting done. So get those KPIs in hand. And remember, what gets measured gets managed. What gets managed gets done. That about wraps it up for today. If you enjoyed today's insights, make sure you like, subscribe, and leave a review. If you are ready to take your bar to the next level, schedule a strategy session with me by clicking the link in the show notes below. Until next time, have a great day, and we will talk again later.